We've just heard in the last hour that the BBC has now suspended the presenter at the centre of all of this. That seems inevitable, but yet it does also raise further risks of the person at the centre of this being identified, doesn't it?
Yes, that's quite right. Although there is an issue around why it is that they have now suspended this presenter, in other words, why didn't they do that earlier? And it does appear, based on the BBC statement that's just come out, that the original allegations that were put to them on the 19th of May were not the allegations that they learnt of on Thursday of last week, and I'm assuming that they learnt of them because the Sun newspaper rang them up and asked them for their comment on them. And so I suppose the question will be, well, if they learnt of the new allegations or the full extent of the allegations on Thursday, then why didn't they suspend at that point? Why is it that they've now suspended now? And perhaps that might just be because of the media coverage that this story now has.
Yes, the BBC statement out in the last hour says the BBC takes any allegations seriously and says it has robust internal processes in place to proactively deal with such allegations. But it goes on to say that the BBC first became aware of a complaint in May. New allegations were put to us on Thursday of a different nature. And in addition to our own inquiries, we've also been in touch with external authorities in line with our protocols. And it goes on to confirm that a male member of staff has been suspended. Part of the reason that this does seem to have become such a crisis is because, these allegations, the BBC is saying it knew of them back in May.
Yes, and the real question, Carol, I think, is what exactly were the allegations that were given to the BBC in May? What were the circumstances under which the allegations were made to the BBC? Because that will, I think, have a lot to do with explaining how this matter has been dealt with. The BBC say they have internal processes for dealing with these sorts of things, and one has to assume that they will follow those processes appropriately. And so, it does very much depend, I think, on what the BBC were told about right back at the start, and whether they followed their own processes.
Yeah, this is obviously, as Victoria Atkins was saying, it is a very sensitive issue. There is an individual at the heart of all of this. From what we know, and the Sun newspaper has reported that a mother complained about a top male star paying her child £35,000 for sexually explicit photographs, and she was concerned that it was enabling him to buy illegal drugs. Does it look, from the allegations that we've seen, as if the presenter may have broken the law?
Oh, hello.
Oh, can you still hear us, Paul?
Yeah, sorry, you dropped out when you
Oh,
said, "Does it look?" I didn't
does
hear
it
the end
look?
of what,
Well,
what,
the
what it was you
question
were.
was, does it look as if the presenter may have broken the law?
Well, the question there is the age of the victim, because if the victim was below the age of 18, then that those are criminal offences, and I'll attribute that knowledge to Nazir Afzal, quoted in the Sunday Times this morning, who I've absolutely no reason to doubt isn't correct about that. And of course, it does also beg the question about why, given that this, if it is right, these are criminal allegations, the police weren't approached in the first place, rather than the BBC being approached. And look, there will no doubt be an explanation for that. But the basic answer to your question is yes, it may well be that criminal offences have been committed.
What we're already seeing is that there are all kinds of rumours swirling on social media. And of course, this has led to a number of other BBC stars, including people like Gary Lineker and Ryland Clark and Jeremy Vine, all having to make statements to say, look, it's not me. I mean, this is a difficult situation, isn't it? Because it does lead to a situation whereby all kinds of different people may find their names blackened, and perhaps in most cases that will be unfairly.
That's right. I mean, the difficulty that the BBC have is that they have to respect the right of privacy of the person against whom the allegations are made. And what they do, what they don't, what they shouldn't be doing is sort of naming them on the basis they're being investigating, because that is potentially career ending. And so in a way the BBC is in a very difficult situation as far as that is concerned, because as you rightly say, you then have the speculation that's been rife on social media about who the presenter is, and some presenters, as you say, coming forward to expressly say that it's not them, and it just turns into a big sort of attempt to sort of work out who hasn't denied it and therefore who the potential person could be, and that's difficult. It's really where these sorts of investigations need to be done swiftly, so that whatever the outcome, appropriate action can be taken, and importantly, confidentiality where it's needed to be maintained has been maintained.
Yeah, and Tim Davie, the BBC Director General, has said by law, individuals are entitled to a reasonable expectation of privacy, which is making this situation more complex. I also want to be very clear that I'm wholly condemning the unsubstantiated rumours being made on the internet about some of our presenting talent. But the risk now, and we've seen this when we've seen allegations against politicians, is that once somebody is suspended, it is really simply a matter of time before, by process of elimination, that person's identity becomes publicly known.
Yes, that's right, Carol, and that's why. And I don't know what the BBC strategy is for dealing with situations like this. Further steps may need to be made. Of course, it's a balance that the BBC have got to meet as a responsible employer, that they are not breaching someone's entitlement to privacy, to confidentiality, and that's the sort of difficulty with this situation. And they're going to have to think quite carefully, I think, about how they move forward with this, given what is currently the situation with the speculation.
I mean, we should be clear that people who make unsubstantiated allegations, which are all over Twitter at the moment against a whole host of different presenters, I mean, those people are potentially going to find themselves committing libel, aren't they?
Carol, you're absolutely right. These people that are I mean, if you think about it, it's the worst libel. Well, it's just about the worst way that you can libel someone to suggest that they're involved in potentially in criminal sexual offences, and those people that are putting out names and saying that are defaming those people, those presenters, if they are not the presenter. And we've already had a number of cases where successful claims for defamation have been made against people who post things on Twitter. So, be very careful would always be my advice. And certainly don't make allegations that you don't know to be true. And how would you know if they are true? So don't make them.
And the BBC is, of course, stressing that it's investigating this, but there's no sign at the moment that it's brought in any kind of outside body to investigate this. I mean, the BBC is in a particular situation because of its funding arrangement and so on. But I mean, for any media organisation, the potential reputational damage of something like this is potentially quite serious, isn't it?
It is indeed, Carol, and you do make a very important point. As we in fact have seen with ITV and Philip Schofield, they've now instructed KC, a barrister, to investigate their dealings with the Philip Schofield situation. In this case, what would happen is that you'd bring in an independent organisation who are specialist in conducting investigations into these sorts of matters. and who will come to a conclusion or make a recommendation as to whether there is anything in the allegations, the extent to which the allegations, if they are sound, they're approved, and then the BBC as an employer takes appropriate action depending on the outcome of the investigation. Now, the point is that because we don't know what it was the BBC were told on the 19th of May, you may look at that and say, well, why did you have to would you bring an external investigator in for something like that? Of course, it appears as though we're in a different ballpark now. New allegations they're told about on Thursday. I think we will see the BBC bringing in some sort of external investigation to look at this. But I think it is important to draw a distinction between internal investigation into the allegations and then probably the inevitable point, which you rightly draw out, which is the fact that it's a public funded body, as to whether there's an investigation into the way this matter was handled by the BBC, which of course is a separate issue.
Yeah, and just briefly, if you could, Paul, of course, if we get to that stage, there'll then be lots of questions asked about whether the BBC has sufficiently changed its practices since, for example, the inquiry that was launched after the Jimmy Saville scandal, and we had a review carried out by Nick Pollard, a former Ofcom executive, who looked into the way the BBC had handled it. And of course, there'll then be questions for the BBC about whether it has sufficiently updated the way it deals with these sorts of allegations.
That's right, and it is about and these processes that are in place should be looked at on a regular basis to make sure that they are up to date, that they are dealing with issues that come to light, and that employers are learning from